Warm welcome to our Blomo Blockchain Monday today. My name is Moritz Schild. I'm one of the founders and members of the board of Hanseatic Blockchain Institute. We have been founded more than 2 years ago here in Hamburg by a bunch of crypto and blockchain interested entrepreneurs who felt that it's a good point in time to just try to find a foundation where we can exchange ideas, cooperate. Initially, there was the idea of having a platform that can be sponsored by even the Senate in Hamburg that initially was pretty much interested. And so we have two targets. So first of all, provide a space for networking and exchange of ideas. And then secondly, we want to to spread the word of blockchain technology by helping people to understand what it is about and what it has in terms of potential to change the world, essentially. And I mentioned briefly, we did workshops and we did different events. However, Blockchain Monday has been one of the most relevant things. So each and every Monday we have a guest speaker and talk about different aspects of blockchain. Quite often, as today, we have startups not only presenting their particular startup, but joining a discussion on application of blockchain. And then we have quite technical things. We have had lawyers, we have tax advisors, and so on. Everything trying to give a better understanding of blockchain and crypto, of course. That's essentially the short intro I wanted to make. The good thing about Hanseatic Blockchain Institute, we are an association, a Verein under German law, and so everybody who is interested to support us is welcome to join us as a member. We have currently around 60 members. For the time being, there are no privileges for members, so there's not so much an advantage of becoming a member. However, at some point in time, as we develop further, there will be a significant differentiation between members and non-members, so make sure that you become a member in time. One tiny detail for the inner group, we have a new person, Jan Konstantin Röhl, joined Hanseatic Blockchain Institute and is supporting us in bringing our website up to date and trying to get new guests for Blockchain Monday and so on. So having said that, please be active in our discussion. Please join, please use the chat or the Q&A function. With that, I would like to move to our guest today, Martin. Great to have you for tonight. Martin has been in the advertising industry, if I understand correctly from your CV, for quite a few years, has already been an entrepreneur, founded, I think, several companies that have been in this sector, and now with AdHash, I think for about 2 to 3 years by now. Please correct everything I do in my intro. He's focusing on something that combines blockchain technology with ad tech, and he's convinced that what he's going to do will disrupt the advertising industry as we know it. And maybe you give us a short intro in a few minutes what the advertising industry is about, because I believe that not too many of us are too much into it. That's essentially what I wanted to give as a short introduction. Martin, please, warm welcome. Feel like having a warm applause from all sides. Tell us briefly where do you come from, and how did you get the first moment to get in touch with blockchain technology?
Thank you very much for having me. So I'm calling you from Sofia, Bulgaria, which is where our development office is. We're headquartered in Zug, Switzerland, and we have some very interesting partners there. But during the pandemic, we have been spending a lot of time here with the team being as close as possible and communicating as much as possible to really build the product very fast. My first, interactions with the blockchain date to the very early days, probably 2012, 13, reading the Bitcoin white paper and wondering where it's going to go. I've been following closely developments, especially with technologies that are not directly related to, let's say, cryptocurrencies and blockchain, but more about what you can build on top of it, not just in our own space, which is the media and advertising industries, but also in others. I think that's where, for me personally at least, that's where the most interesting ideas and applications are happening right now. That's a very brief intro. As a company, we are a team of 18 people now. And we have, this is our second company that we're building in the ad tech space. We have been working together, the founders, for close to 10 years now, actually. And the rest of the team has also spent a significant amount of time with us building AdHash. So we're a small but very tight-knit and very productive team of technologists.
What is the difference between the old companies and the new one? Is it an entirely different direction in the same industry, or is the one kind of building on the basis of the first one?
It's the problems of the ad tech industry are well known, and I will explain them carefully because I think they could be very interesting to the audience. But they're well known in the industry. And we are still trying to solve those very same problems because they still exist, but in a much more radical way. Let's put it this way. What we were previously doing was trying to find the right path across a very complex and convoluted supply chain to just try to optimize what already existed out there. Whereas with AdHash, we're actually re-engineering how that supply chain should work in order to actually bring transparency and actually solve some of those issues that the entire industry is trying to fight against.
From an investor point of view, of course, people would ask, so what happened to the old company that you decided to create a new company? Are they competing somehow?
Good question. Actually, old company never had investors. It was entirely bootstrapped. We built it up and scaled it to about close to 600 clients in 25 different countries. It was a profitable business, but it was a business that wasn't really getting, that leap in terms of transparency and making sense in terms of changing the industry for the better for us. It was still a good business and generating us a lot of cash. So there had to be a trigger point to actually, force us to completely switch our model and go into a more radical rethinking in advertising. And that trigger point happened in 2017 when our biggest partner, Google, who were buying a lot of ads from us and we were buying a lot of ads from them, decided not to pay us the amount of ads that they had bought from us for that particular month. It was close to $500,000. They decided not to pay. It seemed super strange to us because we always had exceptionally high quality traffic, much better than their average big partners traffic, metrics. So we're very surprised by their decision. We're sure it was a misunderstanding. We tried to figure it out. I won't go into all of the details, but the long story short is that after 6 months of researching and discovering what actually happened, we had to launch a class action lawsuit against Google in California because Google were effectively stealing money from publishers. And that class action lawsuit is still going on, but it already had a partial results, and Google already refunded $75 million back to advertisers for the money that they confiscated from publishers. So we had a very interesting legal result for the industry.
Okay, but how much did it go to your company or?
Our own damages have not yet been decided. They'll be probably decided maybe next year. But this is what we have done for the industry and for the ad agencies and advertisers across the globe.
So you're close friends with Google since then.
Very good friends.
Yeah. Just briefly, because many people say so blockchain is a new technology that is essentially geared to eliminate the intermediary, and Google is one of the top intermediaries. Is that part of your kind of mindset as well, to have a technology that will help get rid of these data cracks that sit in the middle?
Yeah, I'll actually go into more details about all the different ways in which blockchain is benefiting what we've built. It's not just removing the intermediaries, it's also about creating transparency for the public of what advertising is funding, what content, and so on and so forth. But what people usually remember most about our technology and how we deliver it is the removal of intermediaries. Because in the ad tech world, that's a huge problem and a huge supply chain. I was going to go into the details a little bit later on, but I can give a spoiler alert. Close to 70% of the advertising budgets are consumed by the middlemen in the ad supply chain. And not only that, but they very rarely actually bring value. Very often they bring negative value or no value in the best case. So it's a pretty massive problem when you think about the simple process of serving what's essentially an image file, an ad from an advertiser or publisher, to have to pay 70% on a global industry that's worth hundreds of billions of dollars is sort of ridiculous.
Okay, so maybe you give us a short intro how the advertising market and the online market, because everything you do is related to online advertising. You would not cover the kind of magazines that do ads and newspapers and this stuff. It's purely about online advertising, right?
That is correct.
Okay, so please give us an introduction to what this market is about.
Absolutely. Maybe I will share my screen. I have some things that I can show the other participants. Let me just do that. Okay, should be able to see my presentation now, I believe.
Yeah. You might want to do full screen.
Well, yeah, I did actually, and it's playing on my screen, but it's not playing on yours. So let me try again.
Okay. Oh yeah, now it's good.
Okay, yeah. So in order to understand why the advertising industry is so complex, I thought we should start at the very beginning of digital advertising, which many consider to be the 27th of October 1994, where when AT&T purchased the first display ad on Hotwired, which is known as Wired.com today. This is what the ad actually looked like. It was pretty basic by today's standards, but it had an incredible click-through rate of 44%. People familiar with the ad industry will know that today's click-through rates are typically in the range of 0.1 to maybe 1%. So, this was orders of magnitude higher, mostly because people had never seen anything like it, and some of them probably even click on it by accident. But, this is how it all started. And as you can imagine, it had almost no targeting whatsoever associated with it. They just paid for the space to be able to show this ad to the readers of Wired. And that you mentioned print advertising and TV advertising. It sort of brings us back to what Ogilvy once said about advertising spending, which is that half the money I spend on advertising is wasted. And the trouble is I don't know which half. Right. So people in the digital era thought, well, now we have all those technologies. The cookie has been just recently invented. We can do so much more. We can actually track what's happening and, which ads are showing to whom and how they perform. So essentially, ever since the first ad was displayed, the journey to try to make digital advertising more advanced and more transparent began. It was a pretty long journey, and funnily enough, things were actually going much better in the beginning, let's say, decade and a half. And then as the big advertising monopolies of today, Google, Facebook, Amazon sort of took over, things started slowing down in terms of innovation and also being increasingly hostile to the user and turning the user into a product, essentially.
This process of being online and getting into targeted advertising, who invented that? Was it the providers of advertising space, or was it one of the advertisers who said, I'll put cookies in, or whatever? Out of curiosity, I don't actually know how this evolved.
Well, funny enough, I don't know in this particular instance whether it was AT&T who approached Wired or it was Wired approaching AT&T. I would assume it was the latter because publishers obviously wanted to monetize, and they already were selling display ads in their printed magazines, so it only made sense to do the same online. But the idea of showing an image ad next to content wasn't new. What was very new and very disruptive in digital advertising happened over a decade later, sort of at the same time that Bitcoin was first launched, approximately. Real-time bidding was invented, which is the automated auction-based process of purchasing advertising. So you will no longer have to call a magazine and ask them to input an ad and then have to negotiate prices and have to negotiate targeting and have to negotiate placement. You would just run a script on the publisher's website, and the advertiser will be able to automatically display ads there. And they will bid, the different advertisers will bid against one another, and whoever the highest bidder would be, they will have the right to show that particular ad at that particular moment. So that was a super disruptive and impressive invention at the time that really sparked the proliferation of advertising technology and the ability to share content for free online. Because at the end of the day, that's what advertising is for. I mean, that's why we as a team are passionate about trying to solve some of its problems. Advertising is what pays for us to be able to access free content online. And unfortunately, over the past half a decade or a decade, we have sort of been conditioned to believe that it has to be an exchange for privacy, and it has to be an exchange for our personal data. That we cannot access free content unless we are tracked and unless we are bombarded with intrusive advertising. And it really isn't the case, as I'll show with some metrics and some data that we have measured. You can have advertising that is perfectly privacy preserving and user focused, and still allow advertisers to capture attention and still allow publishers to monetize their content. So there really is a formula that works for all the parties. It doesn't have to be at the expense of one of them.
Okay.
So just as a very quick, timeline of what happened after this first ad was served, people realized that this digital advertising thing could be huge. So they started working on making it bigger and, scale more and becoming more automated. So they started building at first simple ad networks. An ad network would essentially just be a bunch of advertisers and a bunch of publishers combined together through one intermediary, and whoever the highest bidding advertiser would be able to purchase the ad spot on the publisher. So it was a very simple premise. Obviously, this would depend on the scalability of the ad network itself. So people eventually discovered ad exchanges, where ad exchanges would combine multiple ad networks within them. So now you'll have all the different ad networks with all of their supply and demand partners competing against each other. So that was a big development, and this is where real-time bidding came into play. And this is where the complexity of the entire ecosystem sort of started taking over. And now it became increasingly complex, and you would have so many different kinds of intermediaries appearing on the landscape. You would have supply-side partners, demand-side partners, data management platforms. You would have ad fraud prevention, validation tools, brand safety tools, and so on and so forth. It exploded so fast that, as you can see here, within just 7 years, you had a 30-fold increase in the number of different ad tech companies that existed out there. And today that number is even much bigger than it was back in 2017. It just wouldn't fit onto my slides if it had to be taken any further than that. So
what's they doing? I mean, it's hard to believe that in this relatively tiny process of someone willing to place an ad somewhere and someone having space for it, there can be marketing and design and certain data related services in between, but are they all competing and offering the same services, or how could that?
So in terms of what supply they have for ad spaces, yes, they are very much commoditized. A lot of them essentially offer the exact same inventory. They do try to carve out their own niches and have their own specialties. So some of them would specifically be focused on preventing fraud. Some of them would specifically be focused on optimizing creatives or automating some processes. But the reason why so many of them exist and the underlying the root cause for this complexity is the complete lack of trust over that complex supply chain that digital advertising is today. Every single intermediary communicating with the next intermediary doesn't have any way of validating each other's data. So they have to keep second guessing one another. If you as an advertiser are not certain of what your ad exchange is communicating to you, maybe you try to compare it to the data from your DSP, and then maybe you try to compare that to the data on your ad server, and then maybe you try to compare that to some validation tool, third-party tool that you're using. So you're just trying to work out with a bunch of discrepant databases and trying to find the truth somewhere in the middle. And the reality of it, all of those different databases very often vary. A discrepancy of 10% is actually considered good in the industry. You can very often go as high as 30, 40, sometimes even 50%. So you can imagine how having 10 different databases, each of them being different by a significant amount, becomes impossible to actually track the truth and to be able to figure out what actually did happen to your money, as Ogilvy said.
But when you're talking about data, what data exactly do you mean? Is it the preference data of people that I'm trying to attract, or is it click data and usage data? So the broad width of my ads.
Yeah, great question. It's both actually. So you would want to have your preference about the sort of audience you want to show the ads to be included, and you want to make sure that once the ad has been served, it was actually served to the correct audience. But you will also need the performance data communicated back to you. So how much exactly did you pay? What was the click-through rate? How many impressions were served? How many of them were visible? And so on and so forth. And it's not just inaccurate in terms of the targeting criteria. It's also inaccurate in terms of the simple performance data that you expect to receive. So you would very often end up, a dispute between an advertiser and a publisher would very often have the publisher argue that they served, let's say, 50 million ads, and then the advertiser would say, well, my platform is only showing 35 million. So, now I either want my money back or I want you to serve some extra ads. So there are big discrepancies.
Okay, this picture of 5,000 intermediaries, are there market leaders? Are there relevant players that are on the path of taking over the entire market, or is it really that much diversified and split?
It's very diversified. Obviously, Google is the biggest one here. Facebook is a huge advertising company, but they mostly play in their closed playground. They do sometimes things for the open internet. They typically fail against Google, and they mostly focus on their own properties. Whereas Google is really the dominant force in monetizing the open web. So, if you're an independent publisher and you want to monetize your users, you would most likely will be relying on Google to do so. Amazon is growing super quick in that domain, and there are many independent players. There are a few dozen billion-dollar companies in this space, and there are probably over 100 that are worth 100 million plus. So it really is a pretty diversified space.
Okay, and now AdHash comes in, right? I don't know the next slide, but
no, not yet actually. Not yet. I was going to talk about some other problems, because I mentioned the complexity and how much money it's siphoning out of the ad supply chain, but that's mostly the publisher's problem, right? The advertiser decides how much they want to pay. The problem is that the publisher only gets 30% of it. The advertiser doesn't really care. They pay as much as they expected to. The problem for the advertiser comes from something else. It comes from the lack of quality data being communicated back to the advertiser. So essentially, the publisher knows a lot more than what gets communicated back to the advertiser at the end of the day. And the advertisers' budgets are also very often siphoned away by ad fraud. And I just wanted to talk about ad fraud a little bit, because not many people out of the industry realize this, but I believe it was recently stated that ad fraud is the biggest illegal activity in terms of monetary value after illegal drug trafficking. I think it's bigger now than credit card fraud, and almost no one even talks about it or knows about it. And there are dozens and dozens of different types of ad fraud. Going over them will take many hours in itself. I would just mention a few different types to paint a picture of the most common types of ad fraud. I would say that domain spoofing is a very popular one. That would be a fraudulent website pretending to be a high quality website. So, for example, you could launch a bunch of fraudulent websites that would all communicate to the ad tech players and pretend to be Forbes.com or BBC.com just to attract higher bids. There are many different ways in which this is done. Some of the more extreme ones even involve the bad actors acquiring entire data centers and IP blocks, and those are multi-million investments into running ad fraud operations. But for Medpod and Hypod, I think it was estimated that they generated about 3 million per day in fraudulent advertising activity. So it's a huge industry. Ad tech players are trying to compete against some very smart people who have a huge incentive to game the system. Other more trivial ways of defrauding advertisers would be to have hidden ads, so ads that would never be seen by an actual human being but interacted with by accident, and the advertiser will be charged anyway. Or in the most rudimentary example, just click farms, a bunch of people in a low cost economy being paid to click on ads and to generate fake activity. That can also be automated with some machine learning in SDKs in various mobile apps. You will have stacked ads where you think you're clicking on one ad, but essentially your click is being counted 8 times across 8 different advertisers. You could have ads that auto-install software on your device that also goes into the malvertising type of ad fraud, which is just trying to spread viruses using the ad tech ecosystem. It's a very efficient way. Obviously, if you can get through the protections of the ad exchanges, it's a very efficient way to access hundreds of millions of computers right away. You have I think, I'll not talk about all of them, but one interesting one is the so-called attribution fraud. Attribution fraud is when you have an advertiser who is willing to pay to get a certain result, maybe a purchase or registration or an app install, whatever. And advertisers typically work with many different ad platforms. So if you have one of them focusing not on delivering the right user, but instead stealing the attribution from the other networks, their focus only becomes they sort of hijack the process of the conversion. So whoever actually delivers the attribution doesn't matter. It's the bad player who always claims it, and that's a big problem in in cost per action advertising, and again, costing probably billions of dollars a year, every year. So, there are at least 10 more that I could talk about. And as you can see, there are many different ways in which bad guys can take advantage of the advertisers and publishers. And they're hidden within this huge, vast, complex network of ad intermediaries. And it's super difficult to actually track them and to understand who did what. So ad fraud, it's not just about the inefficiency of the supply chain. It's also that complexity creates the opportunity for bad guys to not just be inefficient, but to directly steal money from advertisers. So to summarize this, I would say that the complexity costs publishers a lot, and ad fraud costs advertisers even more money. But the worst part is that both of them come at the expense of the internet user, because the complexity of the ad supply chain means that hundreds or even thousands of companies track every step we take online. And the potential for ad fraud means that heavy scripts and unwanted, not user-friendly behavior follow us everywhere we go. So we sort of trade our online privacy for the right to access free information online. And as I mentioned, we've been conditioned to believe by Google and Facebook and the other big players in the industry that's necessary and it's inevitable, but it really isn't. It really doesn't have to be. Ads can be exchanged for user attention in a non-creepy and non-invasive way. So that's what I want to essentially talk about today.
Good. Let's come to the solution. And please, everybody, feel free to ask your questions you might have or give your comments in the chat. Yeah,
by the way, while I'm presenting, I'm not seeing the chat. So if there are any questions, please.
I'll let you know, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. In order to explain how to make advertising less creepy and less invasive, I will focus on the distinction between two schools of thought in advertising, contextual advertising and behavioral advertising. So behavioral advertising is what Google and Facebook rely on and focus on more than anything else. It's where the advertising focuses on who the user is, what they do, and what data they can acquire about that particular user. We can sort of present it this way. You will have the focus entirely on the user, and you will try to guess their age, you'll try to guess their profession, you'll try to guess their religion, and all sorts of other inferred information about them. That's a super inaccurate way of targeting users. There are hundreds of studies out there, but the data management platforms could typically communicate those data, show that even relying on guessing basically the simplest thing of those outlined here, the gender, very often comes at an accuracy that's as low as 30%. Whereas if you didn't use any platform to do that, you will have a 50-50% chance of guessing someone's gender. So it's a good example of bringing negative value to the equation and actually charging money for it. Very few of the data management platforms are transparent about what they think about you. But if anyone is interested, I can share links later where you can actually have your own browser display what the data management platforms think about you. And you will see a huge amount of contradictory information that advertisers are actually paying for. So these are all approximate data and approximate perceptions of who you are and what you're interested in. This is behavioral advertising is what requires that huge amount of surveillance and tracking online. Those, hundreds and thousands of companies are inserting cookies into your browser and tracking you everywhere because they try to create a profile of you. The other school of thought, which has sort of been forgotten and we are very heavily relying on, is contextual advertising. Contextual advertising doesn't care as much about the particular user. The contextual advertising cares about the world surrounding the user, what context the user is consuming. So if, for example, you're reading an article about the best ski destinations in Austria, an advertiser would be showing you an ad next to that article for, let's say, snowboarding equipment. for example. So it's targeted directly to what you're looking at now. Contextual advertising, by the way, is how Google search works. Google search is the biggest moneymaker for Google, and it relies entirely on contextual. But for some reason, the display team that is there to monetize the open internet relies entirely on inaccurate behavioral targeting. So here is a brief illustration of what contextual advertising would look like. It would have a lesser focus on the user, and it would have try to incur as much information about the outside world as possible. This is sort of the next level of contextual targeting that AdHash is building, where we don't just analyze what's on a page and within the images. We don't just use natural language processing to figure out what the page is talking about or what the video is showing. We also take into account everything that's happening around you, breaking events, political news, financial data, the performance of currencies or cryptocurrencies or stocks, the weather outside, and so on. I can give a very brief example with a client of ours how this has worked. For example, we had a restaurant target specifically Friday evenings when the weather is bad, because that's when it's a delivery restaurant, so it's a lot likelier for a user to actually order home when the weather is bad, and they will have their campaign spend less when the weather was nice outside in the evening. And the first week they run it, they actually had to call us on a Saturday and ask us to stop it because they were out of food. They just had too many orders and they couldn't deliver them all. So it's an example of directly combining what the user wants with what is happening in the real world around them. I can also mention something else interesting that's been happening in the past decade. Having forgotten about the benefits of contextual advertising, sort of all of the advantages and all of the developments in machine learning and AI were there to benefit behavioral targeting. So essentially to make the surveillance mechanisms even more invasive. Whereas if they were focused on contextual, they could have helped advertisers be much better at automating collecting the right articles to target and correcting the right real world data to use to target users. So that's what AdHash has been doing in terms of targeting for the past 4 or 5 years now. And we're very happy to see that the industry is finally catching up and starting to pay more attention as users are revolting against tracking, browsers are removing tracking capabilities, and regulators are pushing for more privacy.
I mean, this move towards contextual advertising, to what extent does it relate to tracking? I mean, you need tracking as well if you want to do the contextual thing compared to the traditional way, or not? Well,
not really, because you don't gather that information from the user or the user's device. You actually gather that information from the outside world, right? So just to give you an example of how it works, the targeting for specific web pages, we will be crawling web pages, very much like Google does. We will be systemizing that information and analyzing it. And then when we know that a user wants to target a specific content, we would only be showing those ads on those specific pages. In terms of weather data, we're plugged into APIs that communicate weather data to us in real time for the targeted cities for every advertiser. And we have live data plus forecasted data, and the campaign can adapt based on that. Same thing for financial data or sports data. So it's still a lot of data. It's actually a lot more data. It's a much richer data set than behavioral targeting, but it's not coming from you as a user. It's coming from the surrounding world. Knowing that you're in Hamburg, we know what the weather is, we know what live events there are there, and so on and so forth.
Okay, got it.
And
we haven't had any speeches where for 30 minutes the word blockchain has not been used, frankly. But
well, it's a complex industry, and I want to paint the picture of how
that's appreciated.
How messed up it is, and then talk to you about where blockchain comes into play and why at least we haven't figured out a way to be able to do it without a blockchain. Blockchain was the last piece of the puzzle to create the protocol to enable this. So
Yes.
I was going to talk about some case studies and how contextual advertising works and delivers better results than what's out there. But I can skip through those. The gist of it is it works much better because the costs are much lower. You don't have to spend as much on data processing and tracking users. You can have a much lower commission, and therefore you end up as an advertiser spending less while the publisher earns more, and you spend it on higher quality websites. So effectively, in this particular case study, premium publishers got 25 times more of the ad budget than in a behavioral targeting, A/B test. So I can quickly skip through those and go right into the point about how AdHash is doing all of this, and then why we need the blockchain.
Good. There's one question or remark from Wolfgang asking, so is it true that without cookies, advertisers can only use contextual advertising anyway?
That's a very good question. One would hope so, but not really, because advertising companies are trying to come up with other ways to track users and to fingerprint them and to identify them. Google are doing a lot trying to push new, supposedly privacy-focused standards for tracking users that, as you can expect, are not privacy-focused at all. The cookie, in some respects, the death of the cookie even brings more aggressive targeting to market. So it's super important to have an alternative for both publishers and advertisers who want to be compliant, so that they don't have to resort to those shady practices.
Okay, got it.
There's another question about if Google search uses contextual advertising, why do so many people believe in behavioral advertising? Which is a super good question. I would say it's mostly because they also don't have the full transparency into what's happening. They also blindly trust that when they say that they're targeting, women ages 35 to 55 interested in winter sports, they do actually believe that their ads get delivered there. And it's only after they actually pay another company to try to validate the data and try to see what they bought that they realize there is a problem. And that's why bigger companies typically use a lot more partners, because they're trying to sort of get a little bit more transparency. And smaller companies are obliged to have more of a blind trust to the big monopolies. But the beauty of contextual advertising is you don't have to trust anyone. That's the whole point. You can, everything that is measured and everything that's delivered is 100% verifiable. If an ad was delivered to you because it was snowing in Hamburg on a particular date, that's information that can be checked. If the ad was delivered on a specific section of a website or a specific article that's talking about a topic, that can also be checked whether that article exists and whether the article is talking about the topic that was targeted. So it's a much cleaner and more trustworthy way of communicating who the ad was served to and why. But the interesting point here is, why hasn't anyone done anything about it? Why hasn't anyone tried to actually create something that takes more of the data available and targeted? And the reality of it is, you cannot do that in the existing supply chain. It's too slow and it's too constrained, and it's entirely focused on communicating cookies and audiences. We had to rebuild everything from the ground up, starting from the protocol, then building the bidder that matches supply and demand, then building the platforms for advertisers and publishers, and the user interface that the end users use to actually communicate their advertising preferences. So you cannot just piggyback on the existing infrastructure. You have to really rebuild everything from the ground up. And that's what we did with AdHash. We spent 5 years redesigning the core ad infrastructure from the ground up. We wrote over 1 million lines of code, and we served over 1 billion ads while beta testing. And when we were finally done, this is what the advertising supply chain looks for a typical advertiser. We brought up this big dustbin to market, and we threw all of the unnecessary middlemen in it and created a much more straightforward process of serving ads. We are the first platform to enable a direct connection between the user and an advertiser. And what I mean by that is that for the first time, when an advertiser wins the bid to show an ad to a user, the user would actually download the file of that ad, not from some unknown third-party ad server, but from the advertiser's server, the same server that would, for example, serve their content on their web page. So now the advertiser has a first-party look at who that user is, and they have the last word of saying whether they actually validate that traffic or they don't. So as a user, you don't connect, you don't download that image of the ad from Google's server or from some ad tech company's server. You talk directly to the advertiser who is showing you the ad. That eliminates all the intermediaries in the transmission of the file, and you have complete visibility. So now the advertiser has the exact same transparency that the publisher has, and that's why our data match so much better. We have on average 98.8% match rate between the data that publishers and advertisers measure, whereas the rest of the industry has 70 to 80% at best. So
what I like about this picture is that this orange arrow really shows something that one would convert into, okay, they do peer-to-peer, there's a direct relationship. However, there is a large circle in the middle, which still sounds that there's someone replacing many intermediaries by one single large intermediary, and you want to be it, which is somehow a little bit contradictory to the underlying concept of distributed ledger technology, right?
Good point. So we do serve as an intermediary in the financial sense. We take money for what we do. The money we take is an order of magnitude less than what the rest of the industry charges. We charge 3% for direct deals and 6% for real-time bidding, whereas the rest of the industry charges 70% combined. But we are not an intermediary in terms of the data transmission. So we do not touch the data, we do not interfere with it, we do not have any control over it. So in terms of decentralizing the ad serving process, it's perfect. You don't have any intermediaries. You have a completely direct relationship. In terms of getting paid for being the market maker that matches supply and demand, sure, we charge a fee. We wouldn't exist otherwise, but that fee is an order of magnitude lower than you would be paying if you used anything else.
But from a technological point of view, it would be correct to say, whereas in the classical world, I, as an advertiser, would send a banner picture to the publisher and say, please put it on your website. In your model, we would do it technologically entirely different and just say, publisher, could you please put a link on your website or whatever that directly gets the customer, gets the content or the ad from my service, or that's true, even though we are still at the step where we are not yet getting into blockchain technology.
Yeah.
Which at least, as we're getting closer to 8.
Third-party ad serving versus first-party ad serving.
Please be aware that we are at the Blockchain Institute, and we are particularly interested in how blockchain.
Yeah. So it's exactly what you described. In the classical world, you would rely on third parties to serve those ads. In our world, you have the advertiser have the last say and have direct link. And here is finally how blockchain helps us solve all of this, because the idea that first-party data is more reliable and more trustworthy than third-party data is a relatively obvious one. Many people have thought about it. The question is, why haven't any of them done first-party ad serving in the past? And the answer is for security reasons. That picture that you're seeing on the screen, if you allow advertisers to stream files directly to hundreds of millions of billions of users all over the world, the likelihood of some of them doing something malicious is actually very high. They would either stream inappropriate content or something fraudulent, or they will try to serve advertising and viruses and anything else that they can come up with. So you wouldn't have, before having a blockchain, you wouldn't have a way to securely deliver those ads in a way that you guarantee that they wouldn't do something malicious with it. And the way we have used blockchain in this case is we have created for the first time unique identifiers for every ad. Those are hashes. So we just take the file of the ad, we create a cryptographic hash of it, and we record that on the blockchain. And now only after that hash is recorded on the blockchain can the ad be served. So if the advertiser wants to change the file, even if they change the most minuscule detail, just 1 pixel of the image, it will result in a completely different hash, and the ad will never be served, and it will be shown on the actual user. So we have a bulletproof mechanism of making sure that only ads that were approved will be shown, and if an ad has to be blocked, it can immediately be communicated across the entire ecosystem and will be blocked from being served on all devices. This might sound trivial, but in a hugely complex industry, which I described with 5,000 different players, where no universal identifiers exist, it's actually impossible to stop malicious ads once it sort of starts flowing through the supply chain. It's one of the main reasons why Google and Facebook combined have over 15,000 employees just reviewing ads, just reviewing content before it's being delivered to their networks.
But I mean, the necessity of the publisher reviewing the ads, which are now hashed, but I mean, that doesn't make a difference. And so why would the publisher have an incentive to accept this new way, which at least adds complexity and obviously reduces their income somehow?
Well, it doesn't reduce it. I'll address both points. In terms of complexity, it doesn't actually add any complexity. They're still running a JavaScript tag on their page. It takes them a few seconds to implement it, literally. And in terms of earnings, the same advertiser going through AdHash, as a publisher, you would earn 97 cents on every dollar. If it goes through the traditional ad ecosystem, you'll earn 30 cents. So you've got a 3x increase in earnings just by doing that. So there is a financial incentive before we even start talking about the transparency and the privacy benefits of the solution. And so we use the blockchain because we need to secure this system. Without it, we wouldn't be able to allow advertisers to show ads directly. But it also gives us another huge advantage, sort of a consequence of using the blockchain, which is that we now have a public registry of all ads ever served. So you know which publishers have been showing which ads, and you know which advertisers stand behind which ads, and they cannot hide behind it. Like once the hash is recorded, you cannot say, oh, I didn't show that offensive message, or I didn't show that ad. So all advertisers who use AdHash have to be super transparent with the public about what ads they're showing, and they cannot show malicious stuff. So that's I think a huge benefit, a benefit that's already been recognized across many jurisdictions. And Google and Facebook, for example, pulled out of Canadian political advertising because they were forced to give complete transparency into all the ads that are being shown on their platforms, and they couldn't do so. Later on, Facebook tried to launch a public registry of all of their ads, and it turns out it only covered about 10% of all the active ads on the platform. So having it built in by default and not having to trust Google or Facebook to tell you what the ads are, but having it publicly accessible is a big benefit to the public as a whole. And this is not something that we want to have inside of AdHash. This is a standard that we hope others will adapt, and we give it to them for free, open source, so they can use it and people can actually see what ads are funding content online.
Can you give us a little bit more detail about how this works technically? Because I mean, these ads in many cases are not only banners or pictures, but sometimes even content in the clip or film format, and you can't put a film on the blockchain, so it will still be somewhere on a server. And which blockchain are you using? Which technique are you using to hash it, and how do you create this transparency?
Yeah, well, obviously you cannot record the image or the video file on the blockchain, but you can record the hash of it. and anyone can prove that hash, this specific file results to that hash, and we ourselves keep a registry so that there is anyone who wants to compare a specific image format can check whether it corresponds to the right hash recorded to the right advertiser. Initially, when building AdHash, we were relying on the Ethereum blockchain, which, for reasons that many of us are familiar with, is not really scalable for this type of application anymore. And we are now in the process of exploring a few other alternatives that would actually do better in terms of transaction costs. We have super low demands in terms of the numbers of transactions that we have to record on the blockchain. They scale linearly with the number of clients we have, not exponentially, as it will be in many other networks. But the individual transaction cost obviously has to be reasonable in order for it to serve the purpose that we're trying to get here.
And so if you want to walk away from ESA, which are the kind of most obvious competitors or solutions for you, or which is this most suitable one? Can you tell us?
Yeah, we're still not announcing a final decision because we haven't made one. We have, I think, 4 different candidates with different pros and cons. But next month, in September, we'll be announcing which one we're switching to.
All right. So, can you describe in a little bit more detail how? I mean, I think it's getting clear that in order to avoid malicious content, each ad has to be available and needs to be hashed on a blockchain basis. But how do you get the transaction numbers and the click numbers, and so how do these get onto the blockchain? Because that's something I haven't heard before, that clicks are tracked via blockchain.
Oh yeah, you cannot in terms of just for 2 reasons. First of all, there will be a huge volume of data. Real-time bidding advertising does about 10 million transactions each second. No blockchain supports that. More importantly, you don't want that to happen actually, because if you put all of the data for advertising publishers publicly available in a public database, you will be essentially revealing their internal strategies for how they monetize and how they advertise, and they wouldn't agree to that. So what we do instead is each platform for a publisher and advertiser keeps an internal record of all of their transactions, and only it's not a hash, it's the checksum of all of the daily transactions that get recorded on the blockchain. So to give you an example, let's assume you have an advertiser who bought, let's say, 1,000 clicks from 40 different publishers in a 24-hour period. At the end of the day, they would say, I bought all those clicks from those 40 publishers and I paid $400. On the other end, each publisher would keep their own internal record about how many different advertisers purchased from them and for how much. And the platforms automatically communicate through off-chain transactions to compare those 2 data sets. If there is no discrepancy, then there is no further action needed. But if a discrepancy is found, the publisher platform asks the advertiser to actually communicate to them how much they paid to each of their individual publishers. But the advertiser encrypts every one of those lines with the public key of the corresponding publisher. So now our publisher would only be able to decrypt their amounts. They wouldn't know who the other publishers are, but thanks to the checksum, they will know that the advertiser is communicating the correct information and they're not lying. So we also use the blockchain to make sure that those checksums are recorded so that advertisers cannot change their version of history post factum. And the end result of that is that publishers have complete peace of mind that advertisers will actually pay what they said they would pay. And if they don't, the platform automatically blocks them. So, the worst case scenario for you as a publisher is to not be paid for 1 day of work. Whereas, as I described in our lawsuit against Google, even with Google, who is one of the biggest companies in the world, they didn't pay us for what essentially amounts to a 55-day period, because they pay net 25, so you have the whole month plus 25 days. So it's another order of magnitude improvement in terms of safety, financial safety for the publisher.
Okay. I mean, this overall area of communication to potential clients, not only via ads, is something where quite a few new tech companies try to apply blockchain. Your usage, which is avoid malicious content, and secondly, permit a better kind of tracking experience, if I may put it that way, is only one potential aspect. I think there are many other projects out there that use blockchain technology or DLT in many more aspects of this one-to-one information and advertising segment, by having this settlement, by using incentives via tokenomics and so on. That's currently not implemented. However, is that part of your vision, or where do you see additional application areas for DLT in this ecosystem?
Yeah, well, actually, we get asked that by clients, and we leave it up to the clients to decide when they want it implemented. Obviously, it would make sense to have those transactions transacted internally in tokens, because it will be immediate, it will be a lot more cheaper and more efficient. As soon as we have enough requests, we will certainly do that, because it's a very easy step for us to make. We have had those requests for over a year now. They're still not as numerous as we would want them to be in order to prioritize it as a next development task. We have so much stuff that we're building that we're waiting for the right moment where the customer demand really picks it up. We don't want to be forcing a model using tokens on our clients. We want the clients to be the ones asking for it and requesting it. We think it's the right way to do it. And I hope you're right. I hope we're not missing an opportunity that our clients would prefer to have. And speaking of other projects, by the way, I see in the Q&A room that someone is asking me to elaborate on the difference between us and what the Brave browser with its basic attention token is doing, which I also think is a very a very interesting point. We do exist in the same industry. We approach it in a completely different way. I would like to say I really like the Brave project and the people building it, because they're a solid team with a real world product used by tens of millions of users. However, I wouldn't want to be in their shoes in terms of communicating with my users. They are, before anything else, an ad blocking browser. And an ad blocking browser showing ads is not what I would want to be building for my customer base. I think ad blockers are a tiny market in terms of business and a market cap. They destroy a lot of value for the publishing industry, and they try to capture some of it back by showing ads. So that's what Brave is addressing. They're a better and more effective ad blocker than the browser plugins that exist out there, which is commendable. I think some of their browser features are super innovative, and it's good to see a browser actually bringing users that people love to use. But in terms of selling ads to users who have specifically downloaded an ad blocking browser, I don't think that's the best business model that could possibly exist out there. The difference with us, our mission is to make advertising that's transparent, light, and efficient enough so that people wouldn't want to use an ad blocker. We give them enough control to block the ads that they don't want to see, and the other ads are not behaviorally targeted to them, but contextually targeted and are actually useful and non-obtrusive. So it's a different school of thought on how to solve the problem with monetizing publishing today.
Okay, got it. Valid point. So there's another question asking about if you're exploring to deploy your contract infrastructure on Ether rollups, so Arbitrum or SigSync.
Yeah, we are. We're exploring everything. Essentially, we're exploring everything because we don't want to be adapting and changing again. We want to do stuff that's future-proof, and that will allow us to scale the limited number of transactions that we actually want to use, but to have them accessible to enough people, transparent to everyone, and execute at a price that actually makes sense.
So assuming that everybody now has understood what it is about and that this process is helping advertisers to become much more focused and the processes to become much more effective and even more transparent. So you have not yet overtaken Google. What's the most crucial hurdle you have to overtake, or where are the obstacles of getting this launched and really becoming mainstream?
Well, fortunately for us, all of the hurdles that we initially had when we started building AdHash have slowly been disappearing, and the industry has been turning our way. So, for example, 4 or 5 years ago, when we were talking about only targeting contextually, people thought we were crazy, and then we were missing on a big opportunity. Now people realize that that's what actually users demand, and that's where the industry is moving as a whole. So we just have a head start. Thanks to the relentless work we've been doing, our platform becomes more polished day by day and more competitive against Google and the others. The biggest hurdle for us is that when you decide to radically redesign a marketplace, you always have the chicken and egg problem. So you have to have publishers and you have to have advertisers to be able to scale. We have, and that's, I think we've been doing great progress in that respect, but we never want to be complacent. And I honestly do believe that in order for us to effectively stand against those huge companies and get enough market share, we need to be equally innovative in our go-to-market strategy and our growth as we have been technologically. We really need to create the right incentives for publishers and advertisers, and that's what we spend most of our time on. How do we solve problems for publishers and advertisers so that they themselves recommend us to their clients, so that we don't have to do the sales process ourselves, because we alone cannot compete against 100,000 people employed in selling advertising in the rest of the industry. We need to be an order of magnitude better technologically, but we also need to be an order of magnitude better in terms of strategy in order to truly grow. And once we hit that scale, then fortunately our industry is very big and very inefficient, and there are many benefits to be reaped, but it's still a long journey ahead of us.
All right. Just briefly, because you mentioned that privacy is an issue as well, and we did not elaborate on that so much. So your solution, if I may put it that way, is privacy preserving because cookies are not required anymore. So it's just because you're more focusing on the contextual campaign, or is there any other kind of aspect to it which from your point of view is better in terms of privacy?
Yeah. Well, it's not just cookies. We don't use any trackers or any fingerprinting. We don't care who you are. We only care what content you're consuming, and we target the ads based on the content and the real world surrounding you. And I specifically spent so much time of today talking about that, not about blockchain, because I wanted to paint the picture of how advertising is broken and how the industry is too complex and too focused on metrics that are not accurate. So by building the most accurate way of transmitting data in the advertising industry, it would only make sense to transmit data that are 100% computationally verifiable. It wouldn't make sense to have that direct ad serving process only to serve inaccurate data, right? So the two go hand in hand, and we built it so that we can prove that without tracking users, without invading all their privacy and without using any of the dirty tricks that ad tech companies have been using in the browsers, you can still deliver ads that perform better than the ads targeted by Google and Facebook. And that's sort of the main point here. We're not saying, we are a blockchain solution to advertising, and therefore you have to live with those 10 compromises. No, we go ahead and say we will perform better. You can A/B test us right away. We'll do better than your Google ads, and we'll do better than your Facebook ads, and we'll monetize you better than your second best solution is monetizing you. And nothing else. You cannot have out of excuse. You cannot say, I'm trying to build something cool, so please bear with me. It'll perform worse, but it'll make you feel better. No, it has to be a better solution. And that's why it takes so much time to actually get something done in this industry. You go head to head with some of the biggest tech companies, and you'll be immediately compared against them. If you don't outperform them, all your clients will drop you right away.
Great, got it. We are approaching, or we have already behind our kind of 1 hour deadline, but I think it was quite helpful to get such a comprehensive intro to this ad market. That was for me much new, quite interesting to learn, and I think everybody got a clear understanding that you know what you're talking about. And for me, the vision was quite clear, and I think what we could just say, we do hope that this underlying idea of decentralizing the market, permitting privacy and transparency, and these are the core values from my point of view, blockchain and the underlying ideas is all about, will even work out in this pretty special market area. And I think it's clear for everybody that this is not very easy to implement, because there are many companies out there that make a living out of this intransparent part of it, and therefore I'm grateful that we have been able to present your project today, and Martin, that you made yourself available. Thank you to all the attendees for joining us tonight. We will try to hopefully as soon as possible put this on YouTube as well, to make it available to people that haven't been able to be with us tonight. For you, Martin, and your team, all the best. Thank you very much, and schön, dass du dabei warst. Schön, dass ihr alle dabei wart.
Thank you very much for having me. And if anyone has any questions about the tech space, feel free to ask me. It doesn't have to be about AdHash. Very happy to, very passionate about the space, and very happy to discuss any questions. And you even have people with a tie, which I haven't seen for quite a while on a slide that someone is wearing a tie. I typically wear a tie. Okay, have a nice evening, and stay healthy. Tschüss.